Job cuts at the Citizens Advice Bureaux, but demand for its service has increased dramatically. Good evening. There are now fears some vulnerable people will struggle to find help.
Spotlight has learned of widespread redundancies facing citizens' advice workers across the southwest. The organisation says its social welfare caseload is going through the roof and some of the most vulnerable people will be left to fend for themselves. But the government argues it can no longer afford the funding it gives through legal aid.
Well, last year the CAB in the southwest helped people with 211,000 problems concerning benefits and dealt with more than 181,000 debt problems. This year they say it's looking even busier. Spotlight's Claire Casson has this exclusive report.
Angela's been unemployed for a year and a half, but out of the blue her benefits were suspended in September, and since then she's had no money. For someone who spent a professional life as an advocate helping others, her own situation left Angela feeling desperate.
I've got no money. It's scary. In fact, last week I had 2 panic attacks as I was going to sleep at night. This is the worst situation I think I've ever faced. And it really is dehumanising.
Angela's case is just one of the many files on Nick Dilworth's desk. He spends most days representing claimants in tribunals and appeals, reporting an 80% success rate. But his job is one of those being scrapped. The problem is it's largely funded by legal aid, and from April onwards that's being cut. The government says resources aren't limitless and the taxpayer can no longer afford to pay. Instead, the big lottery fund has launched a £65 million budget to help support advice services across England. For many in that sector already, the timing couldn't be worse.
There was an explosion of appeals earlier on in the year. I would now classify that as an absolute tsunami as far as the employment support allowance is concerned. I think what we must remember is that that's the first benefit really on the welfare reform ladder. Already the increases in the appeal load are reported to be up by 40% nationally on last year. So it can only get worse.
In this South Hams office alone, 5 redundancy notices have been issued. And we've spoken to CABs across the southwest who all say they're either in the process of cutting jobs too or desperately looking for alternative funding.
And then I'll advise you in the light of what's said there.
In fact, it's understood there are more than 100 people working for advice services in the southwest who are funded by legal aid and whose jobs could be under threat beyond April. And some cases take years to resolve. We met Hester in January. She's partially sighted and has a range of other health problems. Although she won a benefits tribunal, since then she's had to be routinely reassessed. 2 years on, she's still waiting. Angela is hoping her case will be sorted out soon, but it's a worrying time. Claire Casson, BBC Spotlight, Totnes.
Well, I'm joined now by our political editor, Martin Oates. What's the background to these particular cuts?
Well, the government's obviously trying to save money wherever it can. In this case, it wants to cut the annual legal aid budget, which is currently apparently £2 billion, by £350 million. Now, to achieve that, it's largely withdrawing legal aid from civil cases. That is things like debt, welfare, housing, employment, relationship breakup, child custody, all of those things. Now, that's clearly a problem for the Citizens Advice Bureau because they get quite a lot of money through legal aid. It's by no means their only source of financial support, though. But they're not the only critics of these changes. The Law Society is opposed to them too. Solicitors, of course, get paid for a lot of their work through legal aid. The Law Society says the government could save more than £350 million in other ways and still protect this bit of the legal aid budget. But despite all of that opposition, the changes have now become law.
So is there any hope for people who are affected by these huge changes?
Well, the government's saying yet again we need to learn to make do more creatively with less, a lot less in this case. Claire mentioned that pot of money, £65 million, which people can bid for. The government's also just launched a commission chaired by the crossbench peer Lord Lowe to look at, again, different approaches to delivering and funding these services and also to reducing the need for them in the first place. That won't report until this time next year, though, and the changes will have been in place for months by then.
OK, Martin, thank you very much indeed.